Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When Ryan Hardley returned to his quiet lake house, he expected peace, not war. But his dock had been hijacked, his boat vanished, and a rogue HOA claimed dominion over his land. What began as a property dispute would soon ignite a battle for justice, rights, and revenge. When I pulled up the gravel driveway of my lake house, I was looking forward to silence, coffee, and the view. 2 weeks on the road consulting with a stubborn utility co-op in Texas had left me craving solitude. My dock, my boat, and my grandfather's old rocking chair on the deck. That was the plan for the evening. I stepped out of the truck, grabbed my duffel bag, and started toward the porch when something caught my eye down at the shoreline. Signs. Not mine. I dropped the bag mid-step and walked the slope down to the dock. Sure enough, planted right at the start of the gangway were two brand new metal signs bolted onto wooden posts like they belonged there. Big, bold letters. Private. HOA use only. Trespassers will be reported. My mouth went dry. Below it, some corporate-looking logo I'd never seen. A stylized wave under a blue house roof with the words Lakeview Shores HOA. I stood there, blinking at it like my eyes were playing tricks on me. Except they weren't. My dock had been hijacked. I stepped onto the boards, every one of which I'd sealed and reinforced last summer, and found more surprises waiting. My skiff, a 15-foot fiberglass girl named Hawthorne, had been moved, its original mooring line replaced with a thick blue polypropylene rope I didn't own. The hull had scrapes I knew weren't there before. At the base of the gazebo roof, a metal fire hydrant-looking thing had been installed with a padlock and a service access sticker. I stood there, stunned, watching the soft ripple of Castleview Lake, trying to wrap my head around what kind of psychosis had infected the neighborhood while I was gone. Back inside, I checked my mailbox. Among the usual pizza flyers and energy bills sat a manila envelope, no return address. I opened it. A formal notice from the Lakeview Shores HOA, addressed to me by name, informing me of a violation concerning unauthorized structure on shared recreational waters. They demanded I cease all use of the dock until a review of lakefront. Integration procedures could be completed. They even had the audacity to include an application form if I wished to use my own property again. I felt the vein in my temple twitch. Next morning, a knock came at my door just after 8. 2 people stood outside, a woman in a navy pantsuit with a white binder hugged tight to her chest, and a tall man in a reflective vest with a clipboard. The woman extended her hand like she was blessing me. Karen McNeil, president of Lakeview Shores HOA. You must be Mr. Hardley. It's Hardley, I replied, and I'm not part of your HOA. Oh, I'm aware, she said sweetly, with a smile that could curdle milk, but the lake's a shared ecosystem. The HOA voted to assume management of shoreline infrastructure for safety and uniformity. Your dock has been assimilated. The guy in the vest nodded, like this was a done deal. I looked at them, looked back at my dock, and took a slow breath. You're trespassing. Get off my property, I said flatly. Karen's smile didn't falter. You might want to look into the lake use plans. We're drafting access tiers. You can always submit a petition for access privileges. I didn't answer, just stared until they left, walking back to their Subaru parked near the culvert, acting like they'd just done me a favor. I waited until the dust from their tires cleared and walked straight to my truck. I was heading to the county clerk's office because I knew damn well that my grandfather had the deed to this shoreline. I just had to make sure these idiots remembered how to read. By the time I stepped into the dusty records room of the county clerk's office, I was already rehearsing how I'd make the HOA eat every inch of their fake authority. The building hadn't changed in 20 years. Same humming fluorescent lights, same tired linoleum, same smell of stale paper and old coffee. A gray-haired woman named Jeannie, who'd worked there longer than I'd been alive, recognized me immediately. Ryan Hardley, she said with a warm smile. You finally come to file that no trespassing sign I told your granddad to post back in '07? Close, I said. I need a copy of the shoreline deed and anything tied to dock rights, especially water use from the south edge of Castleview Lake. Jeannie didn't ask questions. Within an hour, I had copies of the parcel registry, a historical shoreline overlay, a survey map from 1984, and Jackpot, the original water access easement my grandfather negotiated when he rebuilt the dock in '89. According to those documents, not only did I own the physical shoreline and dock, but a portion of the lakebed adjacent to it also fell within my parcel due to an old quirk in riparian rights law the county had grandfathered in. Translation, I didn't just own the dock, I owned the dirt it stood on, literally. Back at home, I compiled everything and drafted a formal cease and desist letter. I sent it by certified mail to the HOA's listed address and also emailed a PDF copy to their contact email. Along with it, I attached a legal notice of trespass and property interference with a warning. Remove all unauthorized signage and installations within 72 hours, or I'd pursue criminal charges and a civil claim. I didn't have to wait that long for their answer. That night, just past 2 in the morning, I woke up to the sound of metal clanging. I grabbed my flashlight and headed to the dock. What I saw sent a surge of ice through my spine. The private HOA use-only signs were gone. In their place, 2 black security cameras had been mounted onto poles, angled toward the dock and my back porch. A motion sensor had been zip-tied to the gazebo railing. The padlock on the hydrant was now replaced with an electronic one. But the worst part? Hawthorne, my boat, was gone. Not moved. Gone. Vanished. I sprinted around the property line with the flashlight, hoping I was hallucinating. I wasn't. I called the sheriff's office. The dispatcher sounded sympathetic but firm. We'll send someone in the morning. If it's a property dispute, it'll likely be civil, sir. At dawn, I found an envelope stuffed into my mailbox. No stamp. No return address. Just a single sheet of paper typed in cold, bold letters. You can either integrate or isolate. There is no in-between. You're the only one not part of the community. Make a choice. I stared at it, gripping the paper until it crumpled in my fist. The message was clear. I was being warned, or worse, invited to surrender. I didn't call anyone. I didn't rant on the internet. I didn't even tell Jeannie. Instead, I drove to a hardware store and spent $2,000 on security cameras, reinforced locks, trail sensors, and motion-triggered floodlights. Then I made a second call to someone I hadn't spoken to in years, a man named Avery Lang. Avery used to be a federal marshal. Now he worked private. If someone was watching me, sneaking onto my land and stealing boats in the dead of night, I needed someone who knew how to play dirty and legal at the same time. By nightfall, we had the place wired tighter than a military base. Avery reviewed the envelope and didn't say much, but the look in his eyes told me everything I needed to know. Something bigger than HOA politics was brewing. And Karen? She wasn't just delusional, she was organized. 2 nights passed with no incidents. Cameras silent, motion sensors untouched. Avery stayed in the guest room, his Glock never far from reach, eyes flicking to the windows like a man back in hostile territory. I'd worked with combat pilots, storm chasers, and oil field inspectors, but I'd never seen someone ex-military go this still unless they were hunting or about to be hunted. Then, on the 3rd day, a white SUV with tinted windows pulled into my gravel drive. No plates, no HOA logo, just clean corporate ambiguity. 2 men stepped out wearing matching khakis and polos, each with laminated ID badges clipped to their shirts. "Morning, sir," the taller one said. "We're here for the property assessment, part of the HOA shoreline review." "Assessment of what?" I asked, standing on the porch with my arms crossed. "Your dock. And water filtration compliance under the Lakeview Management Plan. Just routine," he added with a plastic smile. I didn't answer. Avery stepped up beside me. "IDs," he said. They flashed them. Fast. Too fast. Avery caught it immediately. "You just showed me a Costco card and a blank badge," he said flatly. "Turn around. You're trespassing." They hesitated for half a second too long. Avery took a single step forward, hand near his waist. Not drawing, just reminding them we were not their type of problem. They turned and left without another word. The SUV didn't speed, didn't peel out, just rolled away like nothing was out of place. But we both knew what that was. Testing the perimeter. That afternoon, I drove into town to speak with the tax assessor's office, curious about the HOA's sudden obsession with lake management. I wasn't ready for what I found. Turns out, Lakeview Shores HOA had filed a management claim over Castleview Lake just 2 months ago. They had no legal grounds. Castleview was a multi-jurisdictional water body, half public, half private, with parcels like mine owning direct lakebed access. But they were smart. They'd filed for a cooperative lake enhancement program with the State Water Board, using vague language about public recreation expansion and shoreline unification. The state hadn't approved it, but they hadn't rejected it either. It was pending. In bureaucratic terms, pending is where bad ideas fester until someone gets hurt. Back home, Avery was poring over drone footage he'd captured overnight. Nothing unusual until minute 32. A small dinghy floated past the dock. No lights, no motor, just one silhouette aboard, low to the hull. The figure reached over and adjusted something near my gazebo post, then drifted off. Avery froze the frame. "That's your new motion sensor." "Looks like they bypassed it." "Someone's training these people," he muttered. That's when I remembered the HOA meeting notice I'd thrown away last month. The one Karen had sent to lake-adjacent property owners. I dug it out from the trash in the garage. It detailed a community access integration plan and listed my address under non-compliant parcels. The language was vague, sure, but the intent, crystal clear. They planned to force everyone into their model or isolate them until they gave up. No thanks. So I went digging deeper. I pulled old aerial photos, county records, property maps. That's when I found the gem. A survey map from 1984, signed by a now-dead county surveyor that detailed not just my shoreline, but my underwater property line. Thanks to a fluke clause in the deed, probably negotiated by my grandfather with bourbon and stubbornness, I owned part of the lakebed itself, which meant HOA couldn't just touch the water near me. They'd be trespassing underwater. With that in hand, I drafted my real move, a formal counterclaim. I filed it at the county courthouse with an attorney's help and copied it to the sheriff and the state water board. My demands were simple: immediate cease of all HOA activities near my property, full restitution for the missing vessel, and an investigation into coordinated harassment. 2 days later, I received an envelope delivered by hand. Inside, a countersuit from the Lakeview Shores HOA. They were suing me for obstruction of lake access. They claimed I was violating the shared spirit of the lake, creating hostility and impeding their mission to protect and unify the shoreline. They even attached screenshots of their signs on my dock as evidence of communal placement. Avery whistled low and said, "They're not backing off. They're escalating." So are we. I never thought I'd spend my weekend barricading a dock like it was a forward operating base in Afghanistan, but that's exactly what Avery and I did the following Saturday. By noon, we had anchored steel cable fencing on the landward side, reinforced the gazebo supports with custom cross-bracing, and added 2 new cameras, this time with low-light color optics and infrared tripwires. If the HOA wanted a war over lake access, they were going to have to come through a retired pilot and a former federal marshal with too much free time and an unlimited grudge fund. That same afternoon, while we were tightening bolts on the railing, a slow-moving black Escalade pulled up across the property line near the gravel road. Out stepped none other than Karen McNeil herself, wearing white slacks, designer sunglasses, and a clipboard like she was planning a photo shoot. Behind her, a younger man in a collared HOA windbreaker carried what looked like a presentation board. "Mr. Hardley," she called, walking toward us as if she owned the trees. "I'm here to formally present our shoreline usage policy. You're interfering with community unity." Avery stepped forward with a GoPro already recording. "You're not welcome here. Leave now or we'll contact the sheriff." Again, she barely blinked. "This isn't just about you anymore. We've begun phase 2 of the Lakeview Initiative. That dock has been marked for inclusion in the Community Access Plan, regardless of individual ownership claims." I laughed, dry and sharp. "Phase 2? Lady, this isn't a Marvel movie. That dock is mine. That shoreline is mine. And unless you've annexed private property rights from the state of North Carolina, I suggest you turn around." She held up a printed aerial photo of the lake, color-coded, with my property highlighted in red under a new label. Undesignated. High value zone. Her smirk said it all. "You're holding up progress, Mr. Hardley. You can either get on board or be left behind." "I've already been left behind," I said, stepping down the dock stairs toward her. "On purpose. Now leave." Karen turned without another word, but not before muttering to her assistant something about code enforcement and environmental review. By Monday, I found out exactly what she meant. 2 uniformed lake environment auditors arrived on my doorstep, claiming to be from the State Conservation Office. Their IDs looked passable, until Avery ran a background check and found out both names were linked to a landscaping company in Raleigh that had won a recent beautification contract with Lakeview Shores HOA. They weren't state agents. They were private contractors posing as regulators. The local sheriff finally took an official report when I showed him the drone footage, the trespassing claims, the HOA letterhead from the countersuit, and the new incursion. He promised a formal investigation into impersonation and unlawful harassment. Not that Karen was going to care. That same day, the HOA began circulating glossy flyers around nearby neighborhoods, labeling me a rogue waterfront occupant and accusing me of eco-hostile practices. They even included a blurry photo of me cleaning the dock, hose in hand, with the caption, "Unauthorized chemical runoff." Then came the email bomb. Someone, presumably Karen or one of her HOA minions, had sent mass emails to county officials, the environmental board, and even my employer, claiming that I was under investigation for shoreline violations and disrupting a community-led lake conservation initiative. The HOA was now trying to ruin my career. My boss didn't fall for it. Thankfully, he'd known me since my Air Force days. But he still asked me to keep a low profile. Corporate clients didn't like drama, especially HOA drama. By the end of the week, I'd had enough. I filed a formal complaint with the North Carolina Department of Justice for coordinated harassment, fraud, and abuse of process. I submitted all evidence, video, emails, fake IDs, land records, even the color-coded lake map. And I didn't stop there. With Avery's help, we launched a full audit of the HOA's tax filings. We requested public records, pulled contractor names, vendor payments, and found something we weren't expecting. 3 separate companies hired for shoreline consultation were all registered to the same address, a small storefront in Chapel Hill, owned by Karen's cousin. And 2 payments, totaling over $60,000, had been made just last quarter. That wasn't lake beautification. That was embezzlement. And now, we had her. By the time we handed over the financial findings to the County Fraud Division, Avery was already building a wall of evidence that would have made the IRS blush. We weren't just defending my dock anymore. We were unraveling a financial tumor hidden behind every HOA barbecue and bulletin board. That Monday, I received a formal notice. Lakeview Shores Homeowners Association versus Ryan J. Hardley summons for a civil hearing. The charges? Obstruction of community development, environmental degradation, and failure to comply with shoreline zoning compliance. I nearly laughed, but then I read the fine print. They had submitted altered maps, a falsified shoreline management plan, and even claimed they had been maintaining the dock for years. Karen's fingerprints were all over the documents, and a quick cross-check revealed that one of the notary stamps had been expired for over a decade. Sloppy, desperate, and very illegal. I handed it all to my attorney, a hard-nosed woman named Sheila DeVore, who'd once bankrupted a crooked HOA in Durham with nothing but public records and a courtroom pointer. When she saw the case file, her eyes lit up like a Vegas slot machine. "This," she said, "isn't a lawsuit, it's a last gasp." But before the hearing, things got worse. I came home Thursday night to find Hawthorne, my stolen boat, abandoned near the far end of the shoreline, half sunk in the reeds and stripped of its engine and instruments. The bow was cracked. The nameplate had been smashed off. Whoever dumped her didn't even try to be discreet. I called the sheriff. They took photos, filed another report, and began processing it as evidence of theft and destruction of property. It wasn't hard to connect the dots, especially with Avery's GPS log showing unusual boat activity on the lake the night it vanished. Then came the kicker. My mailbox exploded. Not literally, but figuratively, in the form of a flood of compliance notifications, all signed by Lakeview Shores HOA and marked urgent. They claimed my gazebo violated shade regulations, my dock wasn't aesthetically aligned with community standards, and my noise levels exceeded acceptable thresholds during solitary occupancy events. One letter even demanded I submit a request form if I intended to host any visitors on lakefront structures for periods exceeding 10 minutes. Was nonsense. Laughable, except it came with a deadline. Comply or face daily fines. And it didn't stop there. The HOA filed a motion to request an emergency injunction to bar me from accessing public adjacent water structures, essentially asking the court to ban me from my own dock during litigation. Their justification: community risk and management uncertainty. But this time, the judge wasn't biting. At the preliminary hearing, Sheila tore their arguments apart like tissue paper. She showed the court the real deed, the legitimate maps, the fake notary signature, and the cross-linked payments to Karen's cousin. When the opposing counsel tried to pivot to community preservation, Sheila leaned in and said, "Your Honor, if this is about preservation, why did my client's boat end up in pieces on a mud bank?" The judge didn't grant the injunction. Instead, she set a full evidentiary hearing for 6 weeks out and warned the HOA that if evidence of document tampering or harassment emerged, criminal referrals would be made. Karen wasn't in the courtroom, but her name was. Repeatedly. That night, I stood on what remained of my dock. A chunk of railing had been broken off, probably when they took the boat. I ran my hand across the splintered edge and felt something cold and jagged catch my palm. A bolt, loosened, on purpose. They hadn't just vandalized my property, they had made it dangerous. So I did what any rational person would do. I doubled the security. Then I filed my lawsuit against Lakeview Shores HOA and Karen McNeil personally for trespassing, destruction of property, defamation, and conspiracy to commit fraud. They wanted war. Now they had one. By the end of that week, I was no longer just a property owner. I was a litigant in a full-scale civil battle, a counter-plaintiff, and a damn near unpaid private investigator. Avery and I spent every evening sorting through financial disclosures, drone footage, and old HOA newsletters looking for anything we could use. And oh boy, did we find things. Turns out, Lakeview Shores HOA had a long history of strategic beautification contracts, half of which led back to shell companies tied to Karen's relatives or her second husband's cousin. Avery found tax filings that showed inflated landscaping costs, $22,000 for shoreline stone realignment that had never happened, according to satellite images. It was embezzlement, wearing a polo shirt, and a name badge. Meanwhile, Karen was unraveling faster than a Christmas sweater in a bonfire. She began sending passive-aggressive emails to her own HOA members. We got copies from a mole within the board, where she described me as a violent recluse and environmental hazard with extremist tendencies. She even claimed I had been under federal investigation, which was as false as her manicure. I could have sued her for defamation alone, but I had bigger fish to fry. The week before our next court hearing, something unthinkable happened. 2 men showed up on my property in broad daylight, wearing neon safety vests, hard hats, and holding clipboards. They told me they were from county code enforcement and were initiating preliminary measurements for dock removal under interjurisdictional compliance rules. Only problem? They weren't from the county, not even close. Avery intercepted one of them while I kept the other busy near the gazebo. His fake badge had the seal of Lakeview Environmental Board, a made-up agency that did not exist. We called the sheriff on the spot. The 2 men took off running, leaving behind one clipboard with HOA letterhead underneath the forged documents. That clipboard became evidence. At this point, the county DA's office took an interest, not just because of our case, but because Karen had begun pushing a proposal to absorb the unincorporated lakefront into Lakeview's governance zone, something that would require county approval. She had filed the paperwork without notifying half the property owners, including me. That tipped the scale. The sheriff's office confirmed ongoing investigations into document falsification and impersonation of public officials. Karen was now facing not just a civil countersuit, but potential felony charges, and she knew it. That Friday, I came home to find a bouquet of white lilies on my porch. No note, just lilies, a symbol of apology, peace, intimidation. Who knew? I tossed them in the trash and added another camera above the front porch. But Karen wasn't done. That weekend, a group of Lakeview residents marched down the gravel trail toward my land, holding signs that said, "Protect our lake," and "One shoreline, one community." It was laughable, but also strategic. She was building a public narrative, trying to paint herself as a reformer instead of a thief. So I flipped the script. I called a press contact, an old buddy of mine from my flight days who now worked as an investigative journalist for a regional outlet. I gave him everything: documents, footage, contractor connections, embezzlement trails. He ran a Sunday feature under the headline, "Dockside Power Play, HOA accused of fraud, harassment in Castleview Lake Dispute." It blew up. Local news, then regional blogs, and soon HOA watchdog forums were all over it. Karen's photo, smug at a community event, was everywhere, and the story wasn't flattering. By the time the next hearing rolled around, the courtroom was packed. Reporters, neighbors, even members of her own board showed up. And Karen, she didn't. Her lawyer said she was under medical leave due to emotional distress. Too bad the law doesn't care about stress when felony charges are on the table. The morning of the evidentiary hearing, I arrived in a charcoal suit and boots still muddy from the lake. It felt fitting. The courtroom was already half full when I stepped in. Reporters setting up, HOA members whispering among themselves, and my attorney Sheila reviewing our exhibit binders with laser focus. Avery sat 2 rows behind us, sipping from a thermos like this was just another Tuesday. For him, it probably was. Karen wasn't there. Again. But this time, her lawyer was pale and stiff, holding a folder like it was radioactive. When the judge asked if Ms. McNeil would be attending, he muttered something about emergent mental health complications. Sheila didn't even raise an eyebrow. The judge nodded once and said, "Then let's proceed." Sheila opened with precision, walking through the title deed, the boundary survey, the registered dock permits, and the historic property documents we had obtained from the state archives, all in my name or my grandfather's. Then came the shoreline footage, the GPS logs showing unauthorized visits, the video of the fake inspectors running for their lives, and the forensic report confirming Karen's digital signature on the falsified zoning forms. It wasn't just compelling, it was devastating. The HOA's attorney barely tried to fight it. His rebuttal was limp, filled with vague statements about community cohesion and shared spaces, which Sheila shredded within seconds. Then came the kicker, a sworn affidavit from a former HOA board member, anonymously submitted just days before. In it, the whistleblower confirmed that Karen had ordered the unauthorized removal of my boat, personally instructed board members to approve fake maintenance expenses, and had allegedly discussed using legal pressure to make Hardly sell. The courtroom was silent after that. The judge leaned back, hands folded. "I see no ambiguity in this matter," she said. "The plaintiff is the lawful owner of the shoreline property and associated structures. The defendants, both the HOA and Ms. McNeil, knowingly and maliciously infringed upon those rights." And then, in the calmest voice I'd ever heard, she listed the findings: criminal referral for document falsification, civil liability for property damage, an injunction preventing the HOA from any future interaction with my property, and a judgment in my favor, $340,000 in damages and legal fees. I didn't smile, I didn't gloat, I just breathed. It felt like the first real breath in weeks. The aftermath began instantly. The HOA board held an emergency vote. Karen was removed from her post and banned from holding any office within the organization. 3 board members resigned that evening. Within 72 hours, the Lakeview Shores HOA website was offline. Their landscaping contractor publicly cut ties, and neighbors started contacting me, some to apologize, others to say thank you. And then came the best part. Avery and I walked the shoreline with a team of local deputies and a locksmith. We removed every sign, every lock, every scrap of fake HOA jurisdiction that had wormed its way onto my land. When we reached the dock, I knelt beside the old piling and screwed in a new brass plaque, Private Dock, Hardly Family, EST, 1976, not affiliated with any HO. It gleamed in the sun. Later that night, I sat on the rebuilt edge of my dock, sipping from a glass of bourbon while the ripples played against the hull of the new boat I'd ordered. Not a replica. Something better, something that said, "I'm still here, try me again." But I knew they wouldn't. Karen had vanished. Rumor was she'd skipped town, fled to stay with family in Virginia, while the criminal proceedings were pending. A bench warrant was expected if she didn't appear at the arraignment. As for Lakeview Shores HOA, they weren't long for this world. The headlines that week read like the punchline to a long, absurd joke. Local HOA implodes after property scheme exposed. Private dock owner sinks fraud plot at Castleview Lake. Karen McNeil wanted control of the lake. She got a criminal investigation instead. Reporters called me nonstop. I gave one carefully worded statement. I believe in private property, personal rights, and consequences, especially for people who think they can rewrite the law with a Sharpie and a title they gave themselves. That was all I needed to say. The rest spoke for itself. By the end of the month, Lakeview Shores HOA officially filed for dissolution. With Karen gone, their coffers drained by lawsuits and members fleeing like rats from a sinking pontoon. There was no saving it. A few holdouts tried to keep it afloat, but the county revoked their operating charter after reviewing the mountain of fraud documentation Avery and I had handed over. Karen didn't show up for her arraignment. The judge issued a bench warrant immediately. Weeks later, she was caught by U.S. Marshals in Roanoke, staying under a false name at her cousin's second home. The local news had a field day. Karen on the run became a meme before I even finished my morning coffee. I attended the trial out of principle, not curiosity. She was charged with multiple counts of document falsification, criminal conspiracy, fraud, and property interference. Her defense? Stress, poor judgment, a misguided effort to preserve community harmony. The jury didn't buy it. The verdict was unanimous. Guilty on all counts. She was sentenced to 10 years in state prison with no possibility of parole for the first 5. Her family tried to negotiate leniency by offering to pay restitution. My lawyer smiled and replied, "We already collected that through civil court. Now she can focus on paying her debt to society." I didn't clap. I didn't cheer. I just walked out of the courtroom, the sun warm on my face, and drove straight to the lake. I'd been rebuilding more than my dock over the past few weeks. I added new lighting along the gravel path, repaired the gazebo's roof, and installed a motion-activated security gate near the trailhead. But the final touch was personal, a new flagpole at the edge of the dock. The flag I raised was custom-made, navy blue stitched with the outline of Castleview Lake, and bold white letters that read, "Private property, respect it or regret it." That afternoon, neighbors from around the lake came by, not with questions or demands, but with coolers, folding chairs, and firewood. Someone brought burgers. Someone else brought a Bluetooth speaker. We stayed up late, laughing, talking, sharing stories. No one mentioned HOA bylaws, dock permits, or shoreline policies. The lake was peaceful again. Sometime after midnight, as the embers died down and the stars blanketed the water, Avery leaned back in his chair and said, "You ever think about running for county council?" I looked at him, shook my head, and grinned. No. But if someone tries to tell me how to tie my boat again, I might run for sheriff. He laughed. And for the first time in months, so did I. Really, freely, without the weight of someone else's insanity pressing on my land, my rights, or my name. I stood at the edge of the dock, hands in my pockets, and took in the quiet. The lake may have been for everyone, but this dock, this land, this fight, that was mine, and I had won.